Dr. Duncan as a retained expert, but it makes no reference to her being retained or offering opinion testimony as to the standard of care.
Given the fact that the defendants posited their own expert late without any approval of the court, and the court granted them the leniency to even have a psychological expert, we'd ask the court to consider that.
Judge, she was not disclosed as this, and she would never give a report for this.
Well, I'm looking at what was alleged in the complaint. And I do see paragraphs 120. Dr. Duncan, if you could go sit outside.
So you myself, I'm happy to hear all
Thank you.
that. I'm happy to. Just let me know.
The transcript will reflect that both the jury and Dr. Duncan are outside the court's presence.
Yes, Your Honor. Again, we want to renew our motion to strike the testimony on standard of care on 3 bases. Number one, it is surprise testimony in terms of this witness never being disclosed as a retained or non-retained expert for offering standard of care opinions. Number two, it's outside the scope of the pleadings, which is alleged as a medical malpractice.
Outside the scope of what?
The pleading, the
pleadings.
complaint, which alleges a 766 claim for medical negligence and not one for a breach of psychiatric or psychological care. And third, she's not credentialed under 766 to level allegations of medical negligence against a hospital license under that statute.
Or its doctors.
Or its doctors. And I don't believe her opinion was limited to psychological care, even to the extent she expressed it on those
I
bases.
disagree with that last part.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Those are the bases.
Plaintiff.
Judge, she is qualified and was disclosed as a non-retained expert. And I'm looking for the actual designation, and it was in the, where's my notes? I'm looking for the disclosures. This is your order. No, I need our disclosure. Is this our disclosure? Yes, she is disclosed as a non-retained expert. Her opinions have been limited to the standard of care in the community. She's qualified to testify to that. She's qualified to pass on whether a certain act or action is involved in the pleadings collapse into the proof at trial. There were general allegations incorporated.
What was the din of the disclosure?
Uh, 1912, I think, Your Honor, Kelly's telling me. I've got filing number.
Okay, I see the name. I don't recall there being a motion in limine with respect to Dr. Duncan. Was there one?
Or a Dalbert.
Yeah, we did not make a motion in limine, but we did not have notice either through her testimony or disclosures that she was going to be giving these opinions.
No, with respect to the pleadings issue.
We never received a report from her on that subject either, Your Honor.
She was not required. And we would counter on the timeliness of all of those motions. They also, they made one objection at the time on one question, but not on the remainder.
2816. So this was count 17. Yes, not 17.
Please, I'm looking at the 1912 designation. It says that Dr. Duncan is a retained expert, but it makes no reference to her being retained or offering opinion testimony as to the standard of care.
Given the fact that the defendants posited their own expert late without any approval of the court, and the court granted them the leniency to even have a psychological expert, we'd ask the court to consider that.
Judge, she was not disclosed as this, and she would never give a report for this.
Well, I'm looking at what was alleged in the complaint. And I do see paragraphs 127 and 128. J. Hatch breached their duty of care by terminating Maya's CRPS treatments, by allowing its doctors to act without the requisite knowledge to properly diagnose or treat, and by acting in opposition to Maya's outpatient provider's diagnosis and treatment regimens. Also 128, failed to develop a coherent treatment plan. Instead diagnosing Maya with a variety of psychiatric conditions, none of which were treated. So it seems that this is definitely within the ambit of count 8, so that portion is denied.
Your Honor, I'd just like to emphasize, she's licensed.
Can we have one person arguing, please?
Whoa, Mr. Anderson, I'll take care of who gets to speak.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Altburn, if you're going to speak, I need you up by a microphone.
I'm sorry. I just want to emphasize that count 8 is a medical malpractice claim under 766. And a healthcare provider for which you can receive a standard of review under 766 is defined. She's in 490 as a psychologist, and that is not a healthcare provider for purposes of Chapter 766. If you look at 766, I think it's 102, it gives you who can testify, and it refers then to where to go to look to the numbers. And she can probably confirm for us, but she's a 490 license, not one of the people listed in the statute.
I believe that's right.
Well, in any event, there's still the count for intentional infliction of emotional distress.
Is there a standard of care, professional standard of care that's applicable to that?
Reasonable care.
I think it's within the ambit of the pleadings, so then it's just a question of whether she was disclosed. Mr. Hunter.
I'm sorry? Oh, Judge, if you look at the disclosure, she is disclosed as a non-retained expert that is disclosed in a quote abundance of caution unquote. There is no indication of that disclosure whatsoever that she is a standard of care witness. It's just not there. And the other
Didn't you all take her deposition? I mean, because I remember having discussions, multiple discussions about whether y'all were gonna take her deposition or not.
We did take her deposition, Judge, and she offered no standard of care testimony. That's my point.
Nor
There was
did
no,
they ask it.
Your Honor has been very, very forthright in saying that experts, particularly experts, would be confined to the parameters of their report. She gave no report regarding this subject. She was not disclosed as a retained expert. She was not disclosed as a standard of care expert. And so this is something that was totally unexpected and something that was not touched upon in her deposition.
Is it true that there was no report by her that referenced these opinions on standard of care?
The, her report is the report, and they've had that in their possession. And non-retained experts, I think, were in a little different category. I don't recall, her report definitely addresses the issue. Now, did she say breach of reasonable care? I can't tell you right now because I haven't read the report.
Your Honor, they asked her the question in her deposition, whether her opinions were to a reasonable degree of psychological probability, and she answered in the affirmative. And they were specifically referenced in her report, so she testified to standard of care in her depositions. Additionally, neither side provided reports for non-retained experts. Both sides named a number of non-retained experts, and the way this operated was that retained experts were required to provide reports.
Was there in her report, her being Dr. Duncan's report, that we just showed to the jury, is there anything about standard of care that, if you could show it to me, if there's anything that you are trying to hang your hat on?
If we could, Your Honor, while they're looking that up, can we have court reporter look back and see what the specific question objected to was? Because if they didn't object to the other one, something.
I don't want the court reporter, I want the court reporter taking down what our conversation is.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I'd point to, do you need to see the report?
You can just tell us what page and you can put it up so I can look at it.
Yes. It's Exhibit 2006, page 005. This sentence was presented, she commented on it. It's the fourth paragraph, I believe. As a result of the lack of a coherent approach, it appears that she received a little bit of medical treatment while hospital administrators and DCF insisted her condition was psychological. Additionally, she testified.
I don't think that's what the objection was.
That's correct, Your Honor.
Anything in here on standard of care, Mr. Whitney?
I say, the professional view of the skepticism. And she received what,
I mean, I'd point to page 11. She was persistently treated by hospital staff. She was lying about her pain syndrome. This is the big paragraph there. After she was warehoused for nearly 90 days without medical treatment for her pain syndrome. And then no less than 3 medical doctors have diagnosed her condition. No less than 3 mental health professionals have evaluated Maya, none of whom have confirmed a diagnosis of factitious disorder. The next paragraph continues, conversion disorder is similarly contraindicated. And then concluding, she points out that neither factitious disorder by proxy or conversion disorder are appropriate diagnoses in light of Maya's documented medical condition.
So, Mr. Hunter, what is the specific motion?
The motion, Your Honor, is to strike the testimony on standard of care in that there is no basis upon which that testimony was made known to us before trial in this report or in the disclosure. She was
So
never
you're just
put forward.
basically saying that last question or two, not her entire testimony?
That's correct, Your Honor. I'm talking about the standard of care testimony she offered. There was, and if I remember correctly, there was 2 questions on it.
There was 2 different questions, yeah.
And I don't believe they objected, Judge.
I'm so sorry?
I don't believe they objected to those.
I'm going to go ahead and grant the motion to strike the last opinion on the standard of care as not disclosed. Anything else?
Well, there's a couple of opinions. First, is it the breach of the standard of care or her statement of what the standard of care is? One had an objection, one didn't.
She can't, there was no testimony in her, or there was no indication in the report she did, and you didn't do a supplemental report that talked about what the standard of care was or whether there was a breach of that standard of care. So,
I understand, Your Honor.
okay.
So, it would be,
I'm gonna tell the jury that the jury is to disregard the last testimony proffered by Dr. Duncan as to the standard of care.
we had
Is-
that.
Mr. Hunter? Anything else?
That's it, Your Honor.
Okay, let's bring in Dr. Duncan. Okay, Dr. Duncan, just so you understand, the court's going to tell the jury that I'm going to direct them to disregard the last testimony about the standard of care that was beyond what was in your report.
Okay,
Okay.
no worries, no worries.
Let's bring in the jury.
No worries.
Sure, is that your turn?
Okay, everyone, please be seated. Okay, members of the jury, I want to confirm while you're away on break, you did not discuss this case amongst yourselves, you did no investigation and received no information. Is that all correct? Okay. And also, members of the jury, I want to tell you that I'm directing that you disregard the very last question and answer regarding the standard of care. So I've granted the motion to strike that testimony, so you are to disregard it. Mr. Whitney.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just before the break, we were gonna turn to your evaluation of Beata. If we could display for the jury exhibit 2007, first page. All right, so this is your cover page of your evaluation of Beata Kowalski, is it not?
It is.
And your data report here is December 5th, 2016, and about a month before Maya's. And that's because you could visit with Beata outside of the hospital. She was not in the hospital, correct?
Yes, and my last contact with Beata was in November, but it took me a couple weeks to get the report down, I was waiting on documents.
All right. And I won't belabor it, but the first, second, and third pages run through again the multitude of records that you reviewed. Much of them overlap what you reviewed for the other family members. Is that true?
Yes.
All right. Turning to the bottom of page 4, you briefly recount some of Beata's childhood and family history. I want to focus for a moment on Beata describing her father as verbally and physically abusive. And then I want to turn to page 5, where she relayed to you at the top that his primary method of discipline was hitting with a belt. And I want to ask you first, she provided you with a questionnaire before you conducted the interview, is that right?
Yes, she filled out a psychosocial history that asked some of this information.
And was it in the questionnaire that she first indicated to you that her father was a disciplinarian?
Yes.
And having that information from Beata Kowalski, did you follow up with her and ask further questions?
I did, and that's in my clinical notes.
What did you learn, in essence, about this physical discipline?
She said she didn't remember much from her early childhood, but she denied that he physically abused her in the sense that you would be making an abuse report in the state of Florida. It did sound like he used corporal punishment from what she could remember. We specifically discussed this because it was referenced in some of the other information about statements that might have made it in one of the reports.
And having explored that with her, did you feel that she suffered from any trauma from the corporal punishment?
No, I did not just from speaking with her, but the other information that I reviewed, which is listed.
All right. Turning to the bottom of that page, I just focus on the last 2 sentences. There was no evidence of a formal thought disorder or that she was experiencing any perceptual disturbances. Overall, she did not appear to suffer from any major disturbance in mood, cognition, or behavior. Would you explain a little bit for the jury what you mean by that?
It's part of my evaluation. We administered several instruments that are listed and discussed in the evaluation, but as part of the clinical interview, I asked specific questions, and her reports to the particular questions that I asked her led me to believe that that there was no significant social emotional problems.
All right. And turning to page 6, she disclosed to you several medications, and at the bottom of the page, including what I believe to be maybe an anxiety medication. You were aware of those medications?
She listed them out for me, and some of those are included from information on medical records, not only from Dr. Wasson, but Sarasota Memorial Hospital, I believe it was from.
Nonetheless, you didn't become aware of any mental health disorder in her history?
No, I know she was, the hospital records that indicated that after a court hearing she had passed out, and she went to the hospital, and they had said she was very stressed that day, but it certainly didn't give any type of long-standing mental health diagnosis.
All right. Then I'm going to, sure you'll be happy, I'm going to fast forward all the way down to summary and recommendations, page 16. Now let's just focus on what you found with Beata Kowalski. Like you just said, you reiterate here in the first sentence, there's no evidence that Beata has ever suffered from mental health problems, correct?
That's stated in the first sentence, correct.
Right. And the collateral interviews, what was the consistent, if there was there a consistent description of Beata that came across in all the collateral interviews?
There was, and I had specific questions that I asked in all the collateral interviews. I always ask about concerns about substance abuse, concerns about mental health, how they know the person, the frequency of their interactions, how long they've known them. And the consistent theme is there was nothing reported to me in the collaterals that they were concerned about their mental health when I asked them specifically, but they also did not describe any behaviors of concern. Like, I wasn't asking them to assess Beata, but they didn't describe any behaviors that would lead me to believe that she had any significant mental health problems. They all, I think, were aware of the current situation with their daughter's health, and that would impact all the family members, concern for the minor child. But beyond that, they didn't express any concerns about her mental health.
All right. And in totality, it seems like the collateral interviewees described her as an attentive, loving mother.
Yes.
Then you move into, in the middle of the paragraph there, that Beata could be forceful and direct, and that could come across as rude and demanding, right?
Yes.
And that came across to you at times in your interviews?
It did when she was expressing her frustration over the lack of professional care she believed was not being provided to Maya when she was at All Children's.
All right. And again, you found no evidence to support the conclusion that she falsified Maya's medical condition, right?
No.
Nor did any of your collateral interviews or the records indicate any ulterior motive she might have had for doing so.
That is true.
And so for those reasons, you conclude here that factitious disorder by proxy may safely be ruled out, right?
Yes, that's the latter half of that sentence.
And factitious disorder by proxy is the DSM name for Munchausen by proxy, is it not?
They changed the name when they revised the DSM.
What is the DSM briefly, in case we haven't touched on that enough yet?
It's the manual for mental disorders where they make diagnoses. A lot of hospitals refer to the ICD-9 as well, and there is like an overlap in the way they code for insurance billing purposes, but it is the manual that people refer to when they're diagnosing mental health conditions, or at least psychiatrists and psychologists use.
So, if the evidence shows that Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital had leveled a diagnosis of Munchausen by proxy, did you come across any records in your review of the Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital medical record where you found that they'd ever evaluated Beata Kowalski?
I did not, and she did not report being evaluated by anyone at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital.
In your field, in the field of psychology, is it appropriate to diagnose someone with a mental health disorder that you have never evaluated?
It is not in my field appropriate to do so.
Let's turn now to Jack Kowalski. And this is Exhibit 2008. I'm really going to speed up here. What was the overall impression you got of Jack Kowalski after running through this process we've already discussed for Beata and Maya?
I didn't have any significant concerns about his mental health either. I think certainly having an ill child places a certain amount of concern and stress, within the family. But again, I reviewed a lot of information. I spoke to a variety of collaterals, and I will note that the collaterals, there were some overlaps, but there were a lot of collaterals that I spoke for example, with Jack, that I didn't speak to with Beata. They had different collaterals, and nobody expressed any significant concerns about his mental health either.
All right, so in all the investigation that you did, you never came across anyone that expressed a concern about Jack Kowalski or his mental health?
No, in fact, some of his collaterals commented that he had been in a very stressful job before he had retired, and that he always handled those stressful situations he did a great job of handling them.
All right.
Within the fire department. He was like a supervisor, so he dealt with a lot of stressful situations.
Let's turn for a moment, if we could publish Joint Exhibit 1001, Starting Evidence, page 3795. This is a continuation of a progress note from again, Dr. Katzenstein, dated November 4th, 2016. So, Jack Kowalski has no pathology or mental health disorder that you found or suspected, correct?
No, not any information that I
Nor
obtained.
did the hospital ever have any evidence that you saw of Jack having a mental health disorder.
Objection to leading.
Overruled.
I never reviewed any medical information from not only this hospital but another hospital that was suggestive of mental health disorder.
Or in the psychological records you reviewed, there was no suggestion of a mental health disorder. in
Not
Jack.
that I can recall.
All right, focusing on the recommendations here. And this is Jennifer Katzenstein. I'm sorry. Let's turn to page 3796. My apologies. Similar tenor to at the top of the page. Again, Jennifer Katzenstein, now we're on November 2nd. So in the absence of Jack Kowalski having any suspicion of mental health disorder or pathology, the recommendation from Katzenstein and Kathy Beatty of social work is that Maya would benefit from a medical foster care setting and be separated from her father?
That's my understanding based on the review of the notes. I did not speak with Dr. Katzenstein about that.
No further questions at this time.
Mr. Shapiro.
Yes, thank you. May it please the court. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You were hired by the attorneys for the Kowalskis, correct?
That is true. I was referred by them. The Kowalskis signed my engagement letter and paid me. You're absolutely right. That was referred and it's in my consent.
Right, and just so there's no dispute about this, you were not an independent court-appointed psychologist. Instead, you were retained by the Kowalskis, paid by the Kowalskis for your work.
That is true. It was not a court-appointed neutral.
Okay. The reason why you were involved was because there was a dependency action going on with DCF in the state of Florida, and one of the questions they needed to visit with you was about visitation. Is that true?
It's been a long time, but I know that when I had limited documentation providing me about the dependency action, but my understanding is that there were some concerns about the parents and that there were psychological evaluations that while they're being requested and they agreed to, I did not see a court order for them. There may have been, but that I was going to evaluate the parents and it was as part of the dependency.
Okay, and just, I'll show you those records next, but just to be clear, in fairness, you're not a medical doctor, true?
No, I've said that more than once.
Okay, I won't belabor it, I promise you.
No, it's true. I'm not.
Okay, you're not here to tell this jury whether Maya has CRPS or not based on your diagnosis.
That is absolutely true.
Okay, you have, since your evaluations of Maya, I believe, were in December and January 2017.
I'm sorry.
You visited with Maya in December of 2016 at Adult Children's.
I believe it was before December that I met with her as a collateral because it was early on in the process. I could go back and look at the notes, but it had to probably be, I would say in probably early November that I went up there just to meet with her. At that point, I even previously testified when they inquired about her. I was using her as a collateral. I didn't do any type of assessment, in that meeting with her. It was the evaluation was later.
After you completed your evaluation of Maya and completed your report, you continued to work with Mr. Anderson's office on this case, true?
I believe around 2020, I participated. I could give you the date. It was around 3 or 4 years ago. They asked me to participate in a call, which I did. I know both attorneys' offices and have requested some information from me, records. And then just prior to this trial, I was deposed, I believe, by All Children's. And then today I was subpoenaed by them, and everybody compensated me for my time.
So let me ask you just a couple questions about
Sure.
your report, which is, in Clay, if you'll put it up, it's Joint Exhibit 2006, and I'll go to page 11. And it's going to be the under summary and recommendations, the second paragraph. I think it's the third sentence. It starts with the Department of Children and Families.
Yes,
And these are your words, correct, that you're writing here?
yes, this is my report.
And you wrote that, quote, the Department of Children and Families intervened and cut off Maya's contact with her parents, siblings, treating doctors, therapists, priests, and friends. That's what you found, correct?
That was my understanding at the time.
Okay. Your understanding was it was the Department of Families intervention that cut off that communication, correct?
That was my understanding.
Let me ask you about some of the records that you reviewed. Well, let me back up for a minute. You understood that All Children's could not discharge Maya without a court order, correct?
Objection.
Legal basis.
It's beyond the scope, and it's delving into issues that's subject to an order of limine.
Overruled on that question.
I don't recall the specifics, but I do know, because I wasn't at all the dependency hearings. I tested a few times, and I know that there were attorneys from All Children's as well as the dependency attorneys. The family had different attorneys, and the Department of Children and Families had several. And I know at some point, I do recall there was this issue of not being able to discharge. I didn't really follow it all, but I do recall something about being an issue with that.
Let me go back to your report since we have it on the screen. And I'll probably jump around from time to
That's okay.
time. That's okay. So let me ask you about the last sentence that you wrote. It says, no less than 3 medical doctors have diagnosed her medical condition, and no less than 3 mental health professionals have evaluated Maya, none of whom have confirmed a diagnosis of factitious disorder. Those were your words?
Yes,
The 3 doctors you spoke to were Dr. Kirkpatrick, Dr. Hanna, and Dr. Chopra, correct?
I did not speak to Dr. Chopra. I testified that when I reviewed his report, and then I reviewed a neurology report. I think I referenced her. I can't remember. I think it is Dr. Barr, maybe, that had diagnosed her with CRPS as well.
Your statement, though, about who diagnosed Maya with CRPS was based on those 3, correct?
Yes,
You did have records from a physician that had diagnosed factitious disorder. Did you know that?
I believe recalling that, I do recall maybe early on seeing some of that.
Okay, because you didn't put in your report to the court or who would read this that there were physicians who diagnosed factitious disorder, did you?
I recall specifically reviewing the records that there were some rule outs in one of the physicians. I don't know if I recall specifically the diagnosis, but I know that the thing that I kept testifying to in the hearings is I think they need to figure out, I was being told the child had a medical issue and that they need to figure out what, if she did or not, in order to find the appropriate diagnosis, because as a psychologist, I cannot make certain diagnoses if there is a medical condition that's causing the symptomology.
Clay, if you'll put up Defense Exhibit 3047-10,
Is this an evidence?
the Tampa General records?
It's not evidence.
Oh, okay. Then
Let's not put it up if it's not an evidence.
I apologize, I thought this was part of the joint. Let me ask you about what you did review and what is in evidence. One of the reports that you did review was that of Dr. Lewis, and I know that.
I do.
Okay. And that was one of the reports that you had to review and comment on when you did your evaluation of Maya, is that right?
I did review it. In fact, one of the things he specifically requested in that evaluation was the person evaluating the mother had that evaluation.
This is in evidence, Your Honor, Joint Exhibit 1046. Clay, if you could put that up, and go to page 7, please. And just for the purpose of background for this jury, Dr. Lewis performed his psychological evaluation of Maya while she was at All Children's Hospital, true?
That was my impression from reading it, because they said a nurse was there, but I never specifically asked where the evaluation took place.
Okay. Well, I'll represent to you that Dr. Lewis met with Maya had all children.
Okay.
Let me ask you about 2/3 of the way down the page about a statement that Dr. Lewis records. It starts open quotes, "my mom." Clay, if you could point that out, please. It says, "my mom," and I'll represent to you, this was what Dr. Lewis is quoting what Maya told him, okay? "My mom and the doctor in Tampa said I got RSD because of my asthma attacks. I don't know what to believe because I really don't want to have RSD, and also I really don't want to go back on all of those pills or have the ketamine anymore. But I'm afraid to tell my mom how I really feel because I don't want her to be more sad and upset than she really is." Did you read that in Dr. Lewis's report?
I did.
Okay. Let me ask you if you also read in Dr. Lewis's report, and I'll go up, Clay, where the paragraph that starts, "Maya further states," the last sentence, Maya reported to Dr. Lewis, it says, "I can't be sure because I don't remember things like I used to. After I went to Mexico and they put me in a coma and my memory got bad." Did you read that as part of Dr. Lewis's report?
I did. I read the entirety of the report.
At the top of the page, did you see that Maya had told Dr. Lewis that she understood that going to Mexico for her ketamine coma unfortunately carried a 50% risk of death?
I did read that.
And did you factor that into your evaluation as well?
I did. I will note, though, I did not discuss any of this with Maya when I did the collateral interview. When I interviewed her, it was like 2.5 months later. I mean, I've got the dates in front of me. And I referenced some of the comments about Dr. Lewis because I had spoken with her. And it's referenced in my report that she denied making some of these statements to me.
Okay, so we'll get to that in a moment, but let me ask one of the other statements that she made that you may have discussed. And Clay, it's the last full paragraph on this page that starts, "In fact, Maya states." It says, "In fact, Maya states," and this is to Dr. Lewis, the psychologist who evaluated all children's, "I really want to tell my dad a lot of what we're talking about, but because of what happened to me, getting on those really bad medicines that could have even killed me, I don't get to see my mom right now. I do get to see my dad, but someone has to be in the room with me. I just want to tell him," meaning my dad, "that I want my mom to get help." Did you review that?
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you about a couple things that you wrote in your report. And you do recall that one of the working diagnoses of Dr. Lewis was factitious disorder by proxy.
I do.
Okay. Let me ask you a couple questions.
I believe when he stated that he's the one that made the referral to the neurologist.
Dr. Lewis also said that Maya had an understandable severe anxiety and depressive response when learning about the ketamine infusions in Mexico. Do you remember that?
I don't have it in front of me, but I recall it.
Okay.
Something to that extent if you're reading it in the report.
So let me ask you a couple of questions about your report, if we can put it back up. This is Trial Exhibit 2006-11. I just want to make sure I understand this. You made the comment about warehousing Maya. Do you remember telling the jury that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last
Well, let me just make
I just couldn't
clear.
hear the last part, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're certainly not telling this jury that in reviewing the records from all children's that there was only 3 hours of therapy, are you?
The records that I was provided to me, I counted the minutes, I can pull it out if I have the records that were given to me, like I said, just based on what I have. I based on, like I said, testified earlier, Dr. Katzenstein, I can go through the dates and give you what I looked at Dr. Katzenstein provided. She did see another, early on, another psychologist. I never spoke to that person. It was early on in treatment. But it was Dr. Katzenstein's notes that spanned. I just went through the notes that were provided to me, that are listed and highlighted, the date and the time.
Who provided you the records?
Some of those I had historically, and then, I had them, and then I was again provided them by opposing counsel. Like, they're the same records, but I had both, and like they provided them separately, but I had them. I believe it was, maybe Deborah Salisbury that provided me initially, that got them from All Children's.
Right, and when you say opposing counsel, you mean counsel for the Kowalskis?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I got them both places, recently, but I had them too.
Are you aware that there was more than 60 hours of physical therapy at All Children's Hospital?
I did not go through the physical therapy, but I knew that they were prescribed. I'm talking about psychotherapy, not physical therapy.
Okay, you are aware, well, and if you're
Two
not.
different things, maybe. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm talking about the
I
psychotherapy.
do, because
Okay.
there seemed to be an allegation that all Children's did was, quote, warehouse this child, but you were aware she underwent dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of physical therapy, right?
I knew she was resistant to physical therapy. I know that they provided it to her, but I also knew they never followed through to figure out, it sounded like what was going on, which I was really surprised, because I know that All Children's has some good neurologists up there.
So let me just show you Joint Exhibit 1001-1951.
Your Honor, we object.
Is this in evidence?
Not to the exhibit, Your Honor, to the line of questioning.
Overruled. You can continue, Mr.
Sure. Clay, Joint Exhibit 1001-1951. I'm just pulling out a physical therapy note of October 31st, 2016. According to this, there was therapeutic activity for 45 minutes. Do you see that?
Yes.
Same objection.
Overruled.
And if we go to Joint Exhibit 1001-1953, again, there's 15 minutes of PT therapeutic activity and 30 minutes of PT therapeutic exercise, correct?
Yes, I haven't reviewed these recently, the times on these, but
Okay.
I was talking about psychotherapy earlier, not physical therapy.
You do understand that physical therapy is a big part of rehabilitation for either conversion disorder, factitious disorder, or CRPS, do you not?
It's my understanding that it's also often recommended, again, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm certainly not an expert on CRPS.
Okay. So without going through 3 months of records, you're certainly not disputing that Maya had over 60 physical therapy and over 30 occupational therapy sessions for which she participated in, are you?
No, I'm not disputing that at all. In fact, I think a lot of the psychotherapy sessions when I went to see her, she was in PT. It referenced that, so they couldn't provide it, so I knew she went, in addition to looking at the records.
Let me put up Joint Exhibit 1001-3746. I was going to ask you about the cognitive and psychiatric therapy. Impressions and recommendations. This is from a Dr. Mark Cabot. Do you know who he is?
Yes,
Who is he?
he's a psychiatrist, been up there a long time.
Okay.
Good doctor.
Actually, Clay, at the bottom of the page, this is for the note. Impressions and recommendations right at the bottom. This was on admission. Were you aware that mom refused a psychiatric consultation on admission?
I was aware of this, I kind of alluded to it earlier, that I knew that there were 2 notes on him, and only one of them that he had seen the child on.
Are you aware that throughout this hospitalization, there were multiple attempts by All Children's Hospital professionals to transfer Maya from All Children's Hospital to Nemours for intensive physical and cognitive behavioral therapy?
Objection.
Legal basis.
Misstates the evidence.
Overruled. You can answer.
I do recall there was a discussion, because I was provided some records, they were provided, and there was a reference in some of the psychotherapy notes where Dr. Katzenstein mentioned Nemours, but I was never given the information of what you're suggesting. Like, I don't know how many attempts. I just know that there was some discussion of trying to get her to divorce.
Okay. And it's a big record. I'm not expecting
Okay.
that you read every page. I'm trying to be
Okay.
fair to you. Okay. Your understanding, though, in talking with Dr. Katzenstein, was that either she or her team was trying at some point early in the hospitalization to transfer Maya from All Children's Hospital to Nemours in Orlando for intensive inpatient or outpatient cognitive and physical therapy.
I saw it in Dr. Katzenstein's note. She never shared that with me specifically. She talked about her work with Maya. But again, I do remember as part of the dependency action, that issue came up, and I just heard pieces of it, you know, as far as when I was going down there to testify. And I know that it wasn't clear to me about like why all that never happened. I believe that there was some suggestion they couldn't provide the medical treatment. There may have been an objection, but I wasn't really involved in that aspect of it.
Okay, let me show you a record and see if it refreshes your recollection of something that you may have seen. This is Joint Exhibit 1001-1765. And I'll represent to you at the top, this is an addendum by a case manager named Audrey Peterson dated November 10th. And Clay, if you'll go down to where it says provision of care in the note, actually start at projected discharge planning and go through provision of care. Were you aware that the parents, meaning the Kowalskis, declined to sign their consent to transfer Maya out of All Children's on November 10th?
I don't know if I recall that time. Like I said, I recall there being some type of dispute and the child not being transferred, but I do not recall the specifics because
Can
it
I
was.
object to this line of questioning unless we're going to put into evidence the actual document being discussed?
Overruling the objection.
Okay. Let me ask you about Joint Exhibit 1001-1760. And on the part where it says Level 2 Case Management Intervention, about halfway down it says, her parents continue to resist to sign the consent to transfer to Nemours. Were you aware of that happening on November 17th, 2016?
I do not recall if I was aware. Again, all I recall is I know there was a dispute as part of dependency action, and there was some concern about the medical care, which is beyond my scope, being provided at the facility. But I do know that I received records that I believe they were gonna send Nemours to when they were, I know that placement was explored. But it is my understanding by all, but I didn't know the outcome.
Transitioning a bit. You did go to All Children's to visit with Maya the first time, right?
Yeah, to interview her.
For a visitation you were allowed in, right?
Yes,
You understood, though, that you couldn't do a diagnostic workup and treatment without staff privileges.
I did, and I've testified to that before when they asked me questions about her after the collateral interview.
Right. That's not unique to All Children's. That's all hospitals.
Yes, it is. In fact, when I called, I knew it's a lengthy process because I've been on staff at a couple of hospitals. And so, when I called up there initially, I did not anticipate, I inquired about it, like, actually it was later that I inquired because the collateral didn't need to be on staff, but I was not surprised that it was not a quick process.
Okay. When you first went to All Children's, I believe let me ask you, Kathy Betty greeted you and brought you to Maya, correct?
I don't recall if she greeted me, but I think I testified earlier that I believe she is the one I spoke to. They go to my notes, but they, made arrangements for me, like I didn't have any difficulty finding her or anything like that.
And that was my question.
Yeah.
The process from when you went to All Children's to meet with Maya, it was smooth, right?
I had no issues in going up there, checking in. They helped me find the rec room. They offered to try to find me a room because it was a Saturday. A lot of the stuff was closed down. And that's when I said, I think this will be, fine. Maya was fine, and I testified earlier about the corridor. It was you know, there weren't people around. And I stayed about an hour, and I let them know when I was leaving. I, you know, walked her back to the rec room.
Okay. You then saw Maya again at the courthouse on January 6th, correct?
That date sounds correct on the report in front of me. But
In your evaluation of Maya was at the courthouse?
it was.
Okay. During either interview with Maya, and just for the sake of speeding up, either meeting her at All Children's or evaluating her at the courthouse, did Maya ever complain to you about physical abuse?
She never used the word physical abuse or suggested anything to me of that nature. I'm a mandatory reporter, which everybody has informed me of. I would have had to call the abuse hotline, and I would have notified everybody. I know you don't have to, but that's my policy.
Okay. If you had, because you're a mandatory reporter, if you had even a reasonable suspicion of some type of abuse of Maya occurring at All Children's, you would have brought that to attention of All Children's and called the abuse hotline.
I would have told all the parties involved because I want them to know that I'm the one that, had to make the report.
Okay. So just to be clear, during both interviews with Maya, she never told you that she had ever been touched inappropriately, correct?
No, and I believe that was asked that in the deposition as well.
Right. And the reason I'm going through it with you again is I can't just play your deposition.
No, it's
but
okay.
I'm going through it with you again. Maya never complained to you about being held against her will in a darkened room, correct?
No, I never had those conversations. I mean, I reviewed some stuff after the fact, I think, position or maybe, but I was never presented any information during the course of my work with the family.
Maya never complained to you about being held in some type of semi-nude photos or anything of that nature, did she?
No, not to me directly.
Okay.
It would have been included in my report.
Maya never told you that her rights, her religious rights were being violated, did she?
She did not use that term. I will say that during the collateral interview, I testified this earlier, she expressed frustration because people from her congregation were not permitted. It was her understanding to see her, and that she couldn't see her priest privately. And so when she told me about her attorney, and I went back and contacted her attorney because she had an attorney, and relayed what she had shared with me.
But just to be very clear for this jury while we're here, during your 2 interviews with Maya, she never told you anything that made you suspicious for either abuse or neglect at All Children's, correct?
Not that would be reportable under what we know the statutory definition of abuse or neglect.
Okay. Let me just ask you a couple more questions about your report. The records, and just to be clear, the records that you were provided, which ones were decided that you would get, was that based on what was provided to you by the Kowalski's attorneys?
No, if you look at my reports, I actually got a disc of a large number of records too from the Department of Children and Families. I reached out to, they're the ones that I believe that provided me, like, there was some duplication in some of the records. It's listed in the report, on my report, everything that I got and who I got it from. I obtained some individual records myself where I would reach out to the therapist and some of the medical doctors. But the voluminous amount of records either came from Deborah Salisbury or the Department of Children and Families. I did reach out to the children's attorney, but I was not provided documents from them, and that's listed in the report.
When you interviewed Maya,
I should have, and All Children's gave me some records directly. I think that's listed in there.
understood. When you interviewed Maya, she did convey to you that she was told that the ketamine coma in Mexico carried a 50-50 risk of death.
Without looking at my report, I don't recall specifically what she said, but I knew that she knew there was a high risk of death. That's in my report. That she heard the doctor. She said directly the doctor spoke with her about it. I just don't have it in front of me. I mean, I don't mistake something.
No, I'm happy to show it to you. That is what your report
Okay,
says.
okay.
Okay.
Then she said that if I said that.
Let me ask you about your evaluation of Beata. At any time during your evaluation of her, did she express any suicide ideation at all?
She did not.
Okay. And based on your assessment of her, did you consider her to be suicidal?
I did not. I would have taken further action if I thought somebody was at immediate risk for self-harm. As a mental health professional, I can make her act. But she never even described having thoughts of death to me, much less a plan.
One moment, Your Honor. I appreciate your time today. I don't have any more questions for you. Thank you.
Mr. Wood?
Were you aware that the only person in this admission at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital that claimed to have diagnosed Munchausen by proxy was Dr. Sally Smith?
I don't recall seeing anyone else making that diagnosis, other than Sally Smith.
And you're aware that she's a rotation director for the residency program at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital?
Okay, the objection is overruled.
So Sally Smith is the rotation director for the residency program at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital.
I do not recall being aware of that specific appointment, but I know that she had some affiliation with them.
And you're aware that she had staff privileges at the hospital?
That was my understanding when I said affiliation.
And you're aware that she serves on multiple executive committees at the hospital?
Object to the leading, Your Honor.
I'm going to sustain the leading.
Are you aware that Dr. Sally Smith serves on multiple executive committees at the hospital?
I do not know if I'm aware of that, but again, I knew that she did some work at the hospital and that she had privileges.
So there was a lot of discussion about Dr. Lewis and him coming in to evaluate Maya at the hospital. Are you aware that the hospital was directed to conduct a neuropsychological evaluation?
I do not recall specifically that the hospital was directed. I knew that I got his evaluation because Dr. Caston seems a neuropsychologist as well.
Are you aware that Dr. Sally Smith handpicked Dr. Lewis to come and do the neuropsychological evaluation?
Your Honor, just object to the leading. I'd like the witness, anyway, object to the leading.
Okay, sustained on leading.
Are you aware how Dr. Lewis was selected to perform the neuropsychological evaluation at the hospital?
I recall reading in some of the information, I believe it may have been in his report, I don't have it in front of me, that the referral, Dr. Smith made a referral.
All right.
I am aware of that.
And so several statements were put on the screen about what Maya allegedly said to Dr. Lewis. Are you aware that Maya disputes Dr. Lewis's reporting?
She disputed some of that specific reporting to me, so I'm aware of some of that.
And earlier you testified, I think on my questions, that, and perhaps on counsel's questions, that you, subject to request from the hospital, provided your raw testing data and the totality of your file for these psychological evaluations, did you not?
It was for Maya's, I believe, the raw test data. I believe they had a hearing, and
All right, so Dr. Lewis makes these statements which Maya disputes. Are you aware that when a request was made to Dr. Lewis for his raw testing data and notes, he claimed to have lost them?
Object to the leading again.
I'm not aware
I'm
of
gonna
any,
overrule that one.
I'm not aware of any records requests other than what was made in my office.
So have you ever seen the notes or a recording of the interview or raw testing data from Dr. Lewis?
I've only seen his written product, the report.
And during this interview, we've established Maya was on multiple medications from the hospital.
Based on the information and the records that she'd taken medication the day before.
All right. Now, with regards to 4 hours of cognitive behavioral therapy, your comments during my questions were limited to the limited cognitive behavioral therapy that the hospital provided during that 3.5-month span, right?
Yes.
And that's what led you to characterize the hospitalization as warehousing this girl.
Yes, and the fact that my understanding is that Dr. Lewis recommended the neurological consult, and throughout the entire process, everybody said a neurologist would be the one to rule out the diagnosis or confirm that the medical doctors were telling me I'm not qualified to do that. And the information provided to me is that that never happened.
And so you were confronted a minute ago with a bunch of physical therapy and occupational therapy records. You never expressed any opinion on the adequacy of occupational therapy or physical therapy at the hospital, did you?
No.
And in everything they presented you, did they confront you in any way with any additional cognitive behavioral therapy record to dispute the 4-hour figure that you tallied?
No, like I just said, the information I have was a duplicate of what I'd previously gotten that y'all provided me with regard to the psychological and psychiatry notes.
The problem that you were pointing out, if I understood you correctly, was that they were alleging that Maya had a psychological disorder. Meanwhile, they provided 4 hours of psychological therapy over 3.5 months.
It's leading and asking answer.
I'm just saying the yes answer.
What is the problem with alleging that a 10-year-old girl has a psychological disorder but not providing therapy, if there is a problem with that?
Well, I think at a minimum, even though I didn't evaluate Maya early on, at a minimum she was on a psychotherapy regimen of getting it weekly. So I would have expected them at least to start with that, and then if she made significant improvements, they might, titrate the therapy, go to both bi-weekly or less frequently. And I think that even whether her issues were psychological exclusively, as some people are taking the position of, or whether it was a medical problem and there were some psychological problems interrelated, secondary, I think certainly the professionals that worked with her in the mental health field, Dr. Katzstein, was even seeing this child was very distressed over a lot of the circumstances. And I think that there was a lot of documentation where, I didn't do the PT, that she got PT because they would go to get psychotherapy and she would be gone, but then there was no makeup session in the hospital.
All right, last area. There was discussion about these attempts to transfer Maya Kowalski to Nemours. Are you aware of the transfer diagnosis that the hospital actually tried to transfer her under to Nemours?
I think as I said earlier, I don't recall the specifics of it. It's been a long time. I just knew that there was some dispute on whether it was going to be an appropriate placement based on, I think that there were some concerns about parents had on whether they could do medical. It wasn't clear to me. I just knew the child never got moved. It wasn't clear to me all the dynamics between all children's, maybe the dependency action and the parents. I wasn't privy to all that.
And so you weren't aware that Johns Hopkins, All Children's Hospital, was trying to force a transfer?
I object to the foundation. She just said she's not aware, and now he's about to give her a leading question to suggest what she's not aware of.
Were you aware of Beata Kowalski's sensitivity to having Maya Kowalski diagnosed with a psychiatric or psychological disorder?
I was aware from my work with Beata that she was concerned that the medical issues, that she had a real medical problem that was being dismissed and labeled strictly psychological. I did not get the impression in my evaluation of her that she was against any type of therapy or intervention. In fact, her therapist reported to me, and it was in the notes, that her and Maya's dad consistently brought Maya to therapy sessions for therapy after having the illness diagnosed.
All right, so we know that Dr. Katzenstein believed that this child had a physical condition, right?
So she told me.
All right, assume for the purposes of this question that Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital is trying to transfer Maya Kowalski, not with a physical diagnosis, but with a psychiatric diagnosis. Knowing what you know about Beata Kowalski, would it make sense for her to resist those efforts?
Objection to the speculation.
Sustained.
Are you aware of a phone call that was recorded regarding this dispute over the discharge diagnosis to Nemours?
I don't believe that I ever listened to any phone call or was provided information on that. Like I said, I got limited information because my work was pretty focused on what I was doing as part of. They had a lot of hearings I wasn't involved in.
I think in summary, your testimony is that you're not familiar with all of the dispute over what diagnosis the hospital was attempting to transfer Maya to Nemours under. Is that right?
True, I had limited information on all the transfer, potential transfer.
No further questions. Thank you.
Very brief redirect, Your Honor. Just to cover a couple things. You are aware, at least in your review of the Tampa General records, and again, Clay, if you want to pull up 3047-10.
Is it in evidence?
Tampa General's not?
It's not in
Okay. Don't put it up on the screen, that's fine. You are aware in your review of the records, there had already been discussion of a psychiatric condition prior to Maya coming to All Children's, true?
I was aware that there were some of those issues, and the child was aware because she did not like TGH for that reason.
Because they labeled her with a psychological condition.
Yes.
Objection.
That was,
And what's the legal basis?
He's asking, it's speculation.
Overruled.
The
You can
reason
answer.
Maya didn't like Tampa General is because they had diagnosed her with a psychiatric condition, correct?
what I was communicated is that they did not believe her, that she had a medical issue, as the resistance was that they were overlooking some of the medical issues, was my understanding, is why she was upset about them.
Just two really quick points. One on your report, Trial Exhibit 2006-10. At the very bottom it says, interview with Sally Smith, MD, CPT, Medical Director. What is CPT?
Child protection team.
It was your understanding that Sally Smith's role in this case was as the Child Protective Services Medical Director, true?
I would have not listed that, but if that was not the case, I knew that she was involved with CPT, and that was on the documentation I believe I received from her. I'd have to look at it.
It's not a trick question.
Okay, I'm just saying, like, I would listed it because that was my understanding she was working with CPT, yes.
Okay. Last question. It's on Joint Exhibit 1046. And I'm going to ask you on question, starting on page 2 at the very bottom. You were asked some questions about whether Maya may have been on medications that may have affected her memory at the time she spoke with Dr. Lewis. Do you remember those questions?
I think I testified earlier that I could not weigh an opinion on them because I'm not a medical doctor.
Okay. You did review this report, though, true? This is
Yes.
Dr. Lewis's report. At the bottom, it says during the 3-hour session, do you see that?
Yes.
Where Maya engaged in many mentally strenuous tasks and some tasks that are physically strenuous due to the visual fine motor, handwriting and copying, and then Clay, if you go to the next page, demands. Maya at no time spontaneously initiates any verbal expressions of pain or cramping. Did you see that?
I did see that.
And in the next sentence, it says, the absence of any spontaneously initiated complaints of pain is noteworthy in that on that day of testing, the only opioid analgesic listed in Maya's all children's medication regimen is PRN, meaning as needed, tramadol, and the attending nurse indicates that Maya has not taken that medication on that morning that she has seen for a 3-hour afternoon assessment.
I was worried that, I think I testified that earlier, that he had said she didn't take medication that day.
So just to be clear, according to Dr. Lewis's report that you reviewed and relied on to some extent, Maya was not on any medication during his examination.
That was my understanding. I was familiar with the task because I'm familiar with the test that he had her do too.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Any brief?
Very brief. You wouldn't expect that, would you? Okay, let me strike that. You met Maya on 2 occasions, correct?
Yes.
If the record shows that Maya did complain to the doctors at the hospital of physical and sexual abuse on multiple occasions,
Objection, Your Honor, move to strike. We're having an approach if we need to.
Okay, members of the jury, I'm going to sustain the objection. I'm also going to direct you to specifically disregard Mr. Whitney's beginning of the question. Anything else, Mr. Whitney?
Nothing further.
Members of the jury, do you all have any questions? Okay, I've got a couple of them coming on down. Stand up and stretch, you are more than welcome. In fact, you're always welcome to stand and stretch even if we're having questions. Anything that you want to do, that's fine. Okay. Well, I shouldn't say that. Transcript will say that there were absolutely no laughs with that one. Okay, Dr. Duncan, how many hours is appropriate for psych treatment without resolving the medical diagnosis?
I evaluated Maya, but it was at the latter end, so I didn't evaluate her early on. But I would have anticipated they would have started with at least an hour minimum of therapy because that's what her prior person that was seeing her was providing. So I would have think at that assessment, then they could determine if they need to increase or decrease their frequency. But I was just shocked with the drastic drop, even overall, because she was getting about at least an hour a week before, was my understanding.
Okay, the next question from the jury. In the absence of medical diagnosis, in the light of the patient treatment, would you or of the PT, physical therapy treatment, would you still use the word warehouse in reference to all children's?
Can you read that one more time?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I misread
No,
it.
you did a good job. Just me, I'm tired.
In the absence of medical diagnosis, in the light of the physical therapy treatment, would you still use the word warehouse in reference to all children's hospital?
I used that term because I did not think they were following up on the neurological line, so I had to figure out what was going on medically with her. And also, they were not providing, there was a lot of suggestion that it was just strictly psychological in nature. And so I would have anticipated getting more than 3 hours of therapy past the initial assessment. As far as PT, I'm not a medical doctor, but in my experience, people that get PT, I've worked in inpatient rehab, they usually have a medical diagnosis to get that, so.
The next question from the jury. Can collateral interviews be performed with individuals that you deem necessary or only with individuals that are provided by your client?
I do both as part of my evaluation. So, they did in this case list the teachers, but it's not uncommon for people not to list people. And so, in my work, just not in this case, I often ask to speak to individuals that may be not listed that I know are relevant. Obviously, the people can choose to participate or not. The collateral can, but in this case, I believe that all of the collaterals, the majority of them, the family did provide me as far as the professionals and so forth. But I don't recall anybody specifically say, "Can you call Dr. Katzenstein?" And I make the effort to call her.
The next question. Do you know if there was an option to apply for temporary privileges at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital that would fast track an approval to allow you to evaluate Maya at the hospital, Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital?
My understanding was there wasn't. They just kind of have a meeting, and it's usually 2 or 3 months, because I know that I had some discussions, and it was probably in December. It was prior to me evaluating her, and so there wasn't anything that I was told about, and I couldn't find anything online about it. So I inquired. I think it was actually Catherine Beatty that maybe initially that I had asked about, and she directed me to somebody.
Okay. Plaintiffs, any further follow-up questions?
Nothing from plaintiffs.
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Jurors, any further follow-up questions? May Dr. Duncan be excused?
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, members of the jury, there is one more witness for today. Do you all want or need to take a 5-minute break, or I'm told that we will be able to finish by 5 o'clock if we start right away.
Judge, I do have a small issue I need to bring to the court's attention before the next witness.
Why don't we take a quick 5-minute break?
Sorry.
Do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not do any investigation. Receive no information. But let's keep this to 5 minutes.
All right, for a second thing.
I have the motion earlier.
Okay, the jury's out of our presence. Ms. Quarles, you spoke first, so what's your issue?
Okay, Judge, the issue that I have with the next.
And everyone, feel free to sit down if you want. If you need to go use the restroom yourselves, feel free to do that too.
The issue I have with this next witness, Judge, is anticipated hearsay that they're going to try to get from Father Costello, and I wanted to address it with the court now. When Father Costello was deposed, he indicated that when he went to the hospital, All Children's, the first time, he was met by a caseworker who told him that he could not pray with Maya because there was a belief the mother was using God and religion to control Maya, so he could not talk to her about religion or give her the sacrament. When he was asked who was that caseworker, he said, "I don't know," and then he was specifically asked on page 88 of his deposition, "Do you recall the name of that individual?" "No, I just remember I met her in the lobby." "Do you recall if she worked for the Department of Children and Families?" "I don't remember, to tell the truth." So he cannot identify this caseworker as somebody that works for the hospital, and I wanted to raise that now and object to that hearsay coming in.
It sounds like cross-examination to me, and party admissions do not require a specific statement of who someone was, rather just the circumstances. In this instance, this was their hospital, and he can identify by hair color and what they looked like coming down there and having a lab coat on in order to tell him about this. So I doubt very seriously that the CPT people are walking around Johns Hopkins in a lab coat.
other than Dr. Sally Smith.
Other than Dr. Sally Smith, you have a pretty good point there.
Okay, I'm gonna overrule the objection on the theory that Mr. Anderson articulated. What's the next issue?
That was the only issue, Judge.
Okay, what's your issue, Mr. Anderson?
My issue is with the last witness's cross-examination, we objected to the line of questioning having to do with the transfer to Nemours Children's Hospital. That document was never in evidence. We objected. I moved to strike that line of testimony and an instruction to the jury about it because it was cross-examination on a document that was not in evidence and the witness did not identify.
First of all, the document wasn't evidence. It was the Johns Hopkins All Children's record.
It's the Nemours record.
No, it was Johns Hopkins All Children's record.
Kelly?
Looks like we're getting a whole bunch of Starbucks.
Would you like one, Your Honor?
No, thank you.
That's gonna get spilled
Wasn't
everywhere.
It was Exhibit 1001. It was the All Children's record.
I'm overruling that objection in the motion. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Do any of the lawyers need to take a break, or are we ready to, as soon as the jury's ready, are we all ready to?
Let's just do Father Costello.
Let's go see if the jury's ready. Let's be careful with all those drinks.
Yes, Your Honor.
No.
New carpet.
Yeah.
New furniture.
All rise, jurors entering.
Okay, welcome back, members of the jury. Please be seated. Just want to confirm while you're away, you did not discuss this case amongst yourselves. You did no investigation and you received no information. Is that all correct? Mr. Anderson, your next witness, please.
Plaintiff's call Father Jack Costello.
Face the clerk and raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
You can cover on this one.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Please state your name for the record.
Father John Costello.
And you were at one point priest to the parish that the Kowalskis were members of?
Yes.
Where were you born? Tell us a little bit about your background.
I was born in Boston, Massachusetts. Oldest of 8 children. Went to all Catholic schools, grammar school, high school, college, grad school. When I graduated high school, I went into the Irish Christian Brothers, which is a religious community that teaches school. I taught all over the East Coast, mainly biology, microbiology, anatomy, and different theology courses.
Mm-hmm.
And then I developed a vocal cord problem when I was in New Jersey, and I finally went to Mass General, and they told me to move to Florida. So that's how
There you
I
are.
ended in Florida, because the humidity would help my vocal cords stick together.
Got it.
So that's how I ended up here. Back in '93, I left the brothers because of the voice. I couldn't run the labs. You have to be loud. So I felt a calling to priesthood. So in '96, I was ordained to this diocese. And I went a few parishes, Naples, Bradenton, and then the bishop asked me to go to the cathedral in Venice here. And I was there 13 years.
Very good. And are you still, and I don't know if the term is practicing, or are you still?
Well, I'm retired, but I'm still active.
Okay.
Covering,
You're called in
masses.
from time to time to.
More than time to time.
All right. And so, you know the Kowalskis,
Yes, yeah.
and do you know that you knew the Kowalskis prior to these incidents with Johns Hopkins?
Yes.
Tell the jury about how long and how well you knew the Kowalskis.
How I met them was Sister Frances Lawler, who ran our religious education program, came to me, I think it was in the fall of 2015, early 2016. I mentioned that there was a family in the religious ed program that had a sick daughter, and they wanted me to come to the home and give her the sacrament of the sick. So Sister and I went to their home. That's the first time I got to know them.
Okay. And so, do you have, did you see the Kowalskis then at the church, at the parish?
Yeah, after that, because I met them,
Right.
if I had a mass they were at, I'd see Maya there and the family.
So approximately how, before all of this occurred, how long had you known them?
Oh, 8 months, a year.
Okay. But you were their parish priest,
Yes,
and you had the opportunity to speak with them from time to time?
yes, yeah.
Okay. Now, I'd like to then turn to the first time that you found out anything about Maya Kowalski's illness. How did that come about?
Well, as I mentioned, Sister mentioned it to me first.
Mm-hmm.
Then going to the home, Beata, the mother, explained what Maya had been going through. And then a couple of months after that, Sister came to me about that the family needed money for medicine for her. Could we help them out?
All right. And was there a drive there at the hospital to try to raise some money for them because of the costs?
Yes, there were, the parish, I spoke before all the masses, and I told people that she had a disease, that we heard that the only way they could treat it was a medicine that in the U.S. they didn't give to children. They had to go to Mexico. So if they'd like to help the family out, they could put checks in the collection, but made out to the family.
And how much did you ultimately raise? Some $14,000?
Roughly about 14,000 and a half, 14,500.
Very good. Now, did there come a time that you found out that Maya was at Tampa General Hospital?
Yes, yep.
And did you visit her there at Tampa General?
Yes, I drove up, went into the hospital, found out what room she was in, went up and I anointed her.
Did you have any problem getting up to her room insofar as anyone addressing you or delaying you or causing you any problem?
No.
And how long did you stay with Maya? Just
It was a Saturday afternoon. I had to get back for masses, so it was not too long, maybe a half hour.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so then, tell us what happened next. How did it come about that you tried to see Maya again, or did see Maya again?
The next time I would have seen her was I received a call from Beata, and she mentioned that her, Jack, and Kyle weren't able to see her. She was worried about Maya's state of mind and physical condition, and asked me would I go up and anoint her, as well as should get to see a familiar face, I believe she said.
Had you heard by this point about the problems with the traveling Mary statue?
No.
Okay, so the family asked you then just to come in and give a hand since they couldn't. All right, so when you arrived at the hospital, having had no problems at Tampa General, tell us what happened.
I parked my car, I went into the lobby, I went over to the reception desk. I think it was an older person there. Told her who I was, that the family would like me to see their daughter. And she just said to me, well, the caseworker has to approve everyone who sees her. And I said, fine, I'll sit and wait.
Okay, and so who came down? Can you describe who it was?
It was a lady, middle age, brown hair,
Okay,
long, and she had on a white coat and I believe a dress.
okay, very good. Now, did she allow you to go up?
She allowed me, she said I could go up and see Maya.
Did she put any conditions on it?
She said I could go up and see her. I wasn't able to do anything religious with her.
Why did they say you couldn't do anything, quote, religious with her?
Because she mentioned that they believed the mother was controlling her using religion.
And so did you ultimately get a chance to see Maya that day?
I got up to go up, but it had to be supervised. The nurse was with me for about 10 minutes.
All right, so over this period of time, what'd you do? Just talk?
I just talked to her, yes, yeah.
Okay. And how was she doing when you saw her?
She looked I believe, lying on the bed. She was coloring. She looked withdrawn, quiet.
How about her feet? Did you notice anything unusual about her feet?
Well, as usual, they were pointed in,
Like this or this? Like
inward.
this? Okay. All right. And what time of the year was this? Was it in the summer or fall? Was it around the holidays?
Fall, sometime in the fall.
And would this have been in 2016?
2016, yes.
All right. Okay, so in getting to know Beata through the course of this, how would you describe her to the jury in terms of her feelings about Maya?
As far as she was a loving mother, didn't notice anything different when I anointed her at the home. Should have the concern as anyone else about a sick child. She seemed to be loving to both Maya and Kyle.
Okay.
Very concerned about her daughter's health.
Certainly. All right. Now, did there come a time then when you came with Beata to a proceeding and sat next to her for support?
Object, Your Honor, and ask to approach.
Objection sustained.
And during the times before Beata's death did you have an opportunity to talk with her occasionally and see her?
Yes, I had the occasion to talk to her.
Okay. And how is she doing?
She was under a lot of stress.
Do you think she blamed herself?
Sustained.
So then, how did you learn that Beata had taken her own life?
I don't remember if it was sister or her brother called to let us know that she had passed.
Was it on that day of the suicide?
It was the day she had died, yes.
And what did you do?
They asked if I'd come to the house and say prayers for the dead and be there for the family.
And did you go to see the family?
Yes,
And try to comfort them? And
yes.
it goes without saying, but how were they doing by the time you got there?
Very distraught, shocked,
And-
worried about how to tell the kids.
All right. Following this, then, did you have a service for Beata?
Yes, we had a mass in the cathedral.
And during this service, I guess you went over the life of Beata and what she was like, so forth?
Usually what I do to develop a homily is get the family and friends to tell me like what her qualities as a wife, a mother, friends talking, and then from my own experience in the parish.
Right. Were you ever aware that Maya had certain items taken from her at the hospital? Religious? Was
What's
that-
the objection?
Relevance and leading.
Overruled on both. You can answer.
Yeah, I was told by Beata.
Okay.
Okay, sustained on the hearsay.
All right, so during the service, did you talk at all to the family as well as the parishioners about the why and how? What did you tell the parishioners to, I don't know, explain what happened?
Your Honor, hearsay as to what he told other people about things. I'm not sure where we're going, but hearsay.
It's not for the truth matter, sort of, Judge, it's just simply
That is
to
not
discuss
relevant.
what was said and what his belief was.
Sustained.
Okay. And so, after that point, were you able to stay in touch with the Kowalskis?
Yes,
And have they been attempting to get over this?
yes, over the years, yes.
But it's still difficult for them.
Yes.
Do you believe that from everything you saw and heard from Beata, she was determined to get her daughter out of that situation?
Objection. Irrelevant as to his belief.
Overruled. You can answer that one.
After the ruling that continuance that she couldn't hug her daughter,
Yeah.
I talked to her after that in the courtroom. And she told me that she'd never get her daughter home.
I did.
The court sustains the hearsay statements as to what was told to him by Beata Kowalski.
But from everything you saw and knew about Beata Kowalski, what was her point of view or goal?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculative, based on hearsay.
Sustained.
from what you saw and heard, Beata wasn't controlling her daughter with religion, was she?
From what I saw, no.
Your witness?
Good afternoon, Father. How are you?
Good, how are you?
You've been here, I saw you in the hallway. You've been waiting a long time to testify. You doing all right?
Yep.
Okay. Father, I just have a few questions for you. My understanding is that, well, strike that. You described that you went to All Children's on one occasion and that you were met by a caseworker, correct?
Correct.
Now, it was your understanding before you went that Jack had put you on a list that was approved, correct?
No, not that time.
Not that time, the next
The second
time?
time I went, yes.
Okay, all right. So the first time you went, were you aware that there was a list of people who had been approved to visit with Maya?
Objection, Your
No.
Honor. Calling for testimony on a docket without showing it to the witness, and I don't believe that docket reflects that.
Overruled. You can answer.
Okay. Were you aware that DCF had been involved and that there was, in fact, a shelter order in place for the hospital with regard to Maya?
All I had heard from Beata was that they couldn't see her. I didn't know there was a list, no.
Okay, and you didn't know anything about an order or why they couldn't see her?
No.
All right, okay. And it's correct, sir, that with respect to the caseworker that you saw that day, you do not know whether or not that caseworker worked for the Department of Children and Family Services, correct?
No, I was just told it was a caseworker.
Okay, you don't know who she worked for, correct?
Right.
Okay. And with respect to the second visit that you went, which was about a week later,
I think it was, or a little in November, or I forget.
it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Right. But a week or so later, you went back, correct?
Yes.
All right. And at that time, you in fact were able to give Maya the sacrament of the sick or anointment of the sick, correct?
Yes.
And pray with her, correct?
Pardon?
And pray with her.
Yes.
All right. And are you aware, do you have any knowledge as to whether or not the hospital had arranged visits with the hospital chaplain or priest to give communion and pray with Maya?
No.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Anderson, anything further?
You were supposed to revisit one ruling under a different exception.
So you may proceed.
That hearing, you went to assist and comfort Beata. Did she, was this right before she committed suicide?
Yes.
And did she say anything to you to indicate now what she was going to do? What did she say? What, if anything, did she say about the reason for all this?
What she had shared with me was, my daughter's deteriorating, we gotta get her home, and they're blaming me.
That's all I have.
Ms. Crowells.
So, Father, just to be clear, you were with her at a hearing when she made this statement, correct?
After the hearing, yes.
Right, and this was this was in the dependency court hearing with DCF, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Right. Thank you, sir.
Anything else?
Nothing further on.
I'm sorry?
Nothing further.
Members of the jury, do any of you have a question? Question? Okay. Father, may this witness be excused?
He may.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Father, you're free to go.
All right, thank you.
Okay, members of the jury, that's going to conclude the testimony for today. Obviously, put your notes back into the red well. My normal statements always apply. Do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Do not do any investigation and receive no information. As you may recall, on Friday, we talked about how I've got matters that I need to handle outside your presence. So we're not going to have you in tomorrow. So your next day that you're going to be with us is Thursday. So I want you at the rallying point at the same time that Deputy Coley has asked you to be there for previous days. Okay? Have a good 2 days, and we'll see you on Thursday.